started. My name is Bill McFarland, and I got asked here to talk about the 8th Kansas Infantry. And the 8th Kansas Infantry was a Civil War regiment that was recruited here in eastern Kansas. So some people came from Holton and some other places like that. But what I'm talking about this afternoon is Company F, which actually was a company that was recruited from, I started without you.
Most of our presenters figured that out.
Okay. that was recruited mostly from Shawnee. There were some guys from Leavenworth there, and Gardner, kind of over in Kansas City. Well, today we would consider almost the suburbs of Kansas City. And they were recruited as home guard. And so they had been promised that they would not leave the state. They would be issued uniforms and equipment and weapons, but they would man the forts here in Kansas, patrol the Missouri border, serve in some of the towns around, and that would free up other soldiers from the regular army to go back east and fight. But once they were recruited, though, they were told that the general who told them they could be home guard didn't have the authority to do that, and that they would be like any other regiment and the government would send them wherever they needed them. So they felt like that was kind of going to reach a contract, but that wasn't the government's view, so tough luck for them.
It kind of sounds like the National Guard.
Yeah, almost like that. In fact, the let me see, I can't remember what I had it. The National Guard kind of looks at the 8th Kansas as their beginning. And when they celebrated the 150th anniversary of the National Guard, they had a painting commission of the 8th Kansas charging up missionary ribs, because it was kind of like the National Guard being federalized and sent wherever they were needed. This is kind of a unique picture because it shows a full company. Now, the company originally would have had about 100 men in it. This is about 1 year into the war, and so those that weren't healthy enough or for other reasons kind of fell out. And so we'll come back and talk about some of the people in this picture, or some of the people that should be in. Some of you, I can point to a guy and say, that's who this guy is. Others that were in the rank and file, well, they kind of all look alike from that distance and wearing the same material there. If you heard earlier, the 8th Kansas was commanded by Colonel Martin, and Martin was an interesting guy. He came out here when he was 18 years old. He was a newspaper man from Atchison, Kansas. He was a delegate to the 1860 Republican Convention where they nominated Lincoln. He was an assistant to the governor. He was a Kansas senator when the war broke out. And when the war broke out, he was just 22 years old. And he's a lieutenant colonel, and eventually, very quickly, rises to the rank of colonel there. So after the war, about 20 years after the war, 1886, he's elected governor for several terms. And his goal as governor was to take care of the old veterans and the widows of veterans were two of his main planks when he ran for governor. Company F has a real mixture. A lot of them were farm boys. A lot of them were in their teens. There were also some that were described as drunkards and roustabouts that were just recruited to fill up the ranks of the company as well. So you had kind of a contrast within the same company. There are future color bearers, flag carriers there. A future commander of the regiment is in this picture. Another guy is he's the father of the future governor of Missouri. There are some who would become heroes. There were some that were kind of scoundrels as well. So it's kind of a cross section of people there. These are the enlisted men and privates here. And if you count them up, there are 43 of them. There are 3 sergeants. Those are the ones that are a little bit in front, and then 3 officers out in front there as well. This picture is taken at Fort Leavenworth at their parade grounds there. And before I go on too much more, let me just give you a quick breakdown of Company F. About 20% of them were foreign born, were immigrants to the United States, representing 8 different countries. 80% of the people in Company F are single, and 64% of them are farmers, although there are 20 different occupations represented by people in this company. During the war, 15 of them will be killed in action, 15 more will die of disease, and about a dozen of them will end up deserting. But the ones that deserted, about 6 of them deserted while they were here in Kansas before they actually were shipped off to fight, and 6 others deserted after Appomattox, because after Appomattox, this regiment, at the end of the war, they signed up for 3 years before the end of the war, whichever came first. But at the end of the war, they were asked to go down to Texas and kind of guard the Mexican border area there. And they, again, some of them considered that a breach of their contract and took off on their own. Let's look at this is the same location today. And so if you look at the buildings in the background there, you can see the edge of this one here, this one here. So these buildings in Fort Leavenworth are still in use today as well. A couple people I'll point out on the left side of the line. The guy that has the little C written underneath him, I think this was his. I've seen 2 different copies of this. This particular copy, I think, belonged to him, and he donated it to the library in Leavenworth. Captain John Conover, there we go. He was a 26-year-old hardware clerk from Leavenworth. He was in several different militia groups before the war began. Was at Wilson's Creek as a staff officer, kind of a volunteer aide for one of the people that was there. And he, Wilson Creek was the first battle where Kansas troops saw action. So we're in Missouri. He had been a lieutenant in Company A until he got permission to raise a company. And when he raised that company, he became the captain of that one. The other guy we'll talk about later on a little bit, Sergeant Neff. Here's the original commander of the company, and Sergeant Neff will be the final commander of Company F there. On the other side of the line, something that stood out to me is, there might be a little distortion here, but even so, that guy looks really tall. I mean, compared to that guy, even compared to this guy, he looked really tall. And so I looked at the records of the descriptive role, and this guy is John Van Camp. He was 6'5" tall in an era where the average height was more like 5'7". So he is head and shoulders above the other. He was the tallest guy in the whole regiment, in fact. 27 years old, single farmer. He had some health difficulties along the way, had some bouts of pneumonia, and by July of 1863, as Kansas is headed towards their biggest battle of the war, he's completely disabled. He can't keep up. And so about 6 months later, he is discharged from the service. And he doesn't come back to Kansas. He had a sister, a widowed sister, who lived in Illinois, and so apparently went there, and she tried to nurse him back to health, but he did not make it. And so about 4 months after he is out of the service, he dies of the effects of that. I don't know if it was dysentery or exactly what it was, but he doesn't show on anybody's casualty list because it shows him mustering out, being discharged for disability. But within months, he has died of the effects of his time in the service. The officer next to him is John and Milton Hadley, and he was a Quaker from Indiana. And you might think, well, wait a second, Quakers, you know, they don't fight, do they? In the Civil War, a lot of them did. I've been really surprised in my research how many times I'll read about somebody being from a Quaker background. Kind of balancing, the Quakers were also very active in the Underground Railroad as well, in lots of communities. And so I think balancing those two together, some of them chose to fight against slavery, as well as some of their homes were stations on the Underground Railroad as well. He was a teacher, which I'm a retired teacher, taught for 44 years, and so he's near and dear to my heart there. He's with the 8th Kansas for a while, then he transfers to the cavalry, and he's with the 9th Kansas Cavalry, and ends up being a major there. After the war, he becomes the sheriff of Johnson County. He's a member of the Kansas Senate, has a law office, and runs a grain mill as well. And when he dies in 1909, his son was the governor of Missouri. Now, I haven't found a photograph of him, but this is a drawing that appeared, a post-war drawing, probably about the time he was maybe either senator or sheriff of Johnson County. All right, so some of the company personalities that I'll come back to several times. Harrison Jones, Moses McCleary, and John Baker, nicknamed Sergeant Jack. Harrison Jones, he's somewhere in that crowd, I figure. There. He was an 18-year-old farm boy from, born in Iowa, but from Iola, Kansas. And he'll work his way up from private to corporal to sergeant to first sergeant, which is the non-commissioned officers there. We'll talk more about him later on. Moses McCleary is an interesting guy because he's the youngest guy that served in the 8th Kansas. He had served in a home guard group when he was just 13 years old there. But a lot of the military age guys had gone to serve in the Civil War, leaving only the young boys and the old men, so their home guard group from Gardner, Kansas kind of broke up. So he decides he's going to join the armies as well. He's only 13 years old though. But he goes around to every recruiting area within 20 miles of Gardner, Kansas, but they all turned him down because he was too young. So he decides to join Company F, but this time he lies about his age. He says, I'm 18. And so they said, and he was apparently large for his age, so they signed him up and he joined the 8th Kansas 2 days after his 14th workday. So I taught middle school kids, so he's a middle schooler. You know, they're fighting in the Civil War. And so we'll talk about him as well, but he was exposed to a lot of things. I don't know how this is possible. He had mumps, I know how that's possible. He had measles, I know how that's possible, but he supposedly had measles twice. So I'm not sure, I didn't know you could do that, but you can. All right, so maybe a mild case and then more severe.
Yeah,
He's there. Now, John Baker is an interesting guy as well, and he's, I don't know if you call him a scoundrel, but he's not the best soldier. He's close to 6 foot, and when they lined up by company, the taller guys would be on the right-hand side, and then they would stair-step their way down to the left-hand side. So in general, tallest guys here, shortest guys there. That was so when you're shooting over the shoulder of the guy in front of you, they were about the same height. There was a reason for that. That didn't apply to, you know, officers or sergeants or corporals. They got plugged in wherever, where they were supposed to be there. So if Sergeant Jack, as he was nicknamed, is here, he'd be on the right-hand side. But I'm not sure he's here, and here's why. Before he came to Kansas, he was an actor back in New York. And so he entertained these guys by spouting Shakespeare and all sorts of other things. Really very entertaining. He was about 6 foot tall, which again would be fairly tall for that era. They said he weighed between 175 and 191 pounds. They wouldn't make any money judging weight at the fair with that discrepancy there. But had naturally curly dark hair, so kind of a movie star kind of look to him, I would say. But he lost his work because I'm pretty sure he was an alcoholic, because he could not stay away from liquor. And so he was not reliable at showing up for his acting careers. And so he comes out here. He may have gone to Pikes Peak, may have gone out during what they at that time termed the Mormon troubles out in Utah. He apparently had some military experience. Maybe he was in the Army earlier, but he knew the drill. He already knew the drill when he was there, so he had that going for him. Captain Conover said of him, he was a hard case but a good soldier when he was sober. But if there was any alcohol around, he would find it. Says he got drunk and that was his trouble. The local paper said that Sergeant Jack was very entertaining among the troops and also entertaining in the courts, because he was frequently before them for being drunk and disorderly, apparently. And they said that Sergeant Jack seemed to, they said, divide his time between the calaboose, which is what their name for a local jail would be, and the Fort Stockade. So he did have a problem there. But was entertaining on the march and apparently in the courts as well. So Jack may be there on the far right side, but probably he's either in the jail or the calaboose, one or the other. Somebody else who's probably in the group is the guy there on the left-hand side. Howard Carpenter there. He was in company, in this company. He was from Quindaro, Kansas, which was the only free-state port on the Missouri River. The others were pro-slavery during Bleeding Kansas time. Basically, every single house in Quindaro was a station on the Underground Railroad. So very, very pro-slavery there.
Wasn't that basically in Kansas City now?
It was right across the river from Kansas City. Yeah. So today, yes, it would be a suburb.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be a kind of a suburb of Kansas City today, I guess you would say, or part of Kansas City. He and his whole family, that's his mother and his brother, and his stepfather, all came to Kansas as early as they could. With the first group of immigrant aid folks from New England, he was part of that. He later on will have some health issues and transfer to the Veteran Reserve Corps, which was a group for soldiers that couldn't do full duty but could be guards behind the lines. His brother, A.O. Carpenter, Aurelius was his name. He went by Real, so Real Carpenter was with John Brown at the Battle of Blackjack during Bleeding Kansas era, and is badly wounded in the arm and chest, and they thought he was going to die. And so his mother came to help nurse him. There was also a young lady in Lawrence that helped nurse him back to health. And actually, he ended up marrying the younger nurse there. Clarina Nichols, I don't know if you're familiar with her or not, but she was a newspaper editor. She also was at the Wyandotte Constitutional Convention women couldn't vote, so she wasn't a delegate. But she was there as kind of a consultant. And from time to time, they would ask her about what she thought about various things. Thanks to her, when that Wyandotte Constitution became our state constitution, as we became a state, women in Kansas had more rights than any other state in the United States at that time. Now, it really wasn't all that much, but they had things that we would take for granted today. The right to own property. In a lot of states, your property belonged to your closest male relative, father, brother, husband. Or child custody rights. If there was a divorce or something like that, before, in a lot of places, children all automatically went with the husband. And also, women were allowed to vote in Kansas from the very first time that we were a state in school board elections. Not in national elections, but in school board elections. That doesn't sound like much, but it kind of tells you what it was like in other places. In Kansas, having those three things, women have more rights than any other state. So those are some of the people, I guess, that we've talked about. Newberry, we won't talk much about him. But the 8th Kansas went back east for a time. These guys did not initially go because they had been escorting a wagon train up to Fort Laramie. So they kind of missed the first exodus, and then they will go later on in February of 1863. They'll head towards Nashville, which is where the other well, not the other companies, but the other half of the regiment was. And so you can see dates there. The National Capitol building, they were involved in doing provo duty there. Keeping the streets safe, opened the theater. So they got to go to a lot of theater because they had guards in the theater to make sure that people behaved themselves. So they got to hear a lot of those kind of things. And as they were there, they began to have people in Nashville take an oath to the United States. And so those that refused to take the oath to the United States were not allowed to be in Nashville. If you're not going to take an oath to the United States, you're part of the Confederacy, you got to go into Confederate lines then. And so while he was there, Captain Conover there, those are both him, on the left there, Captain Conover functioned like the chief of police there. And one of the other officers, I think, jokingly referred to him as superintendent of immigration, as he was the one that would escort the people who wouldn't sign the oath into rebel lines, and did that about 20, 30, 40 at a time, and did more than 200 people were headed out that way. Well, when the whole regiment is there in Nashville, they're one of the largest regiments in the area now, and so they are called up to the front. And so this is probably close to what Conover on the left there looked like. Maybe he had a mustache there when they were in Nashville. But as they headed to the battlefield, headed for Chickamauga, that's how he was dressed there on the right-hand side. So there are tiny little rank marks here, as opposed to those that would stand out more. And he doesn't have his officer's sword, he has a enlisted men's cavalry saber there, not as expensive. So from a distance, he looks more like a farmer going to market than he would an officer there. Here are some of the other officers. Here's Conover again, Company F. James Graham, you can see the little bars there from Company C. And then that's Martin, Colonel Martin, no rank marks at all. This guy is Captain Trigo, Company H, and then Major Schneider there. But none of these guys have anything that would designate them as an officer. So I don't think it took guys who grew up in, here in guerrilla territory, more or less, to understand that it didn't pay to stand out during a battle. And they were doing that before the Army made regulations that said, okay, that is a good idea there. Now, let me see. Sergeant Jack did not make it to Nashville, though. Hanover had recently been married, and so he got permission to stay behind when Company F and the others headed to Nashville. And so kind of a belated honeymoon, maybe, if you will. And so he caught up with them later on. While he was not there, Sergeant Jack, when they were about 30 miles on the other side of St. Louis, gets drunk and jumps off the steamboat that they were on, he and another fellow, when it was stopped. And I'm sure he was drunk. He goes back to St. Louis, where I think he gets drunk again, and he enlists in an artillery unit there. And it could have been maybe they were offering a bounty, but I don't know there. So he doesn't get to Nashville. While the unit is in Nashville, one of the officers of another company resigns, and he travels through St. Louis, and he sees Sergeant Jack there, with the artillery, and he's, asking what's going on. He says, oh, well, I was discharged from the 8th, and so I joined this regiment. Well, it doesn't take him long to write on to Colonel Martin in Nashville and say, hey, Baker's back there in St. Louis. And so he and the other guy are arrested. And they're sent to the regiment for trial. Well, the regiment is already on the road. They're headed towards the Battle of Chickamauga. They don't know that, but that's what will be the end result of their march there. And so they had a trial, and they found Jack guilty there. And he ends up being sentenced by court-martial to 6 months of hard labor. Guess where? Back in St. Louis, which is where he deserted to. So, but now he's become ill, and he's too weak to travel. So he is with the military wagon train behind the lines at Chickamauga. At least they started behind the lines, because the wagon trains get captured of the battle, and so Sergeant Jack is now a prisoner of war. And he does succumb to his illness and dies about a month after he is captured in a rebel POW camp. So that was the end of Captain Jack there. There's an incident involving the flag there, not that particular flag, but after the defeat at Chickamauga, the Union Army is defeated. They retreat to Chickamauga. They're surrounded by high hills, almost mountains there. And the 8th Kansas played prominent parts in kind of pushing them back. First, they took over a small area called Orchard Knob, which becomes the command center. General Grant will have his kind of headquarters there. One of the other privates from another company is sitting on the wheelbarrow at night, watching the attack on Lookout Mountain, almost like fireflies from in the distance, as the rifles are firing. And so he's sitting there with this guy and talking to him, and pointing out something. And when he got up off the wheelbarrow, they were both sitting on a wheelbarrow, and went back to his friends. They're giving him a hard time and said, oh, hobnobbing with the elite now, are you? And he said, what are you talking about? They said, that's General Grant that you were sitting with, pointing out those things. He didn't realize it. It's dark and so forth, but Grant is there as well. But they decide to attack Missionary Ridge, which is the ridge that surrounds there. And at this point, our teenager born in Iowa, is one of the members of the color guard that is as the 8th advances there. And so, let's see. Okay. As they started, there were some trees there, and as they advanced, the eagle-like finial on the flagpole gets caught in a tree branch. And so the color bearer can't go any further, so the guard on either side would grab him by the arm, and so they got 3 guys pulling against him. And the tree is bending, but they realize it's going to break the flag before it breaks the limb. And so they both let go, and here, to their astonishment, the flag and the color bearer who's holding it go flying backwards about 20 feet like we shot out of a catapult. Land flat on his back, and basically he's unconscious. That's when Harrison Jones, picks up the flag and rushes to the front again, and 2 other members of the color guard scoop up the color bearer, who was kind of woozy, and carry him along there. During the advance up there, Harrison Jones will be wounded in the leg, and I'm not sure if he comes back to the regiment after that or not. Moses McCleary, our new teenager, he advances with this. They get to they push the rebels out of the work. They go scampering up the hill, and so now they're on one side. Any rebels that are left in the works, they jump to now the Union side of the works, because the shots coming down are just as dangerous to them as it is as we're attacking them. Moses McCleary and a couple of guys advance beyond there to some kind of shanties or small makeshift kind of cabins that the rebels had built there. And they can hear the bullets striking the roof of that cabin. They said it sounded like being inside in a hailstorm. So there was plenty of things going on there. A shell hits nearby, and the shanty collapses on top of these guys. Moses McCleary jumps up, grabs his gun, and he heads back towards the Union line at the same time that the Union line was advancing. So he quickly sees what's going on, and he joins them there. This is a painting that was done of the 8th Kansas reaching the top of Missionary Ridge. And this is the one that was done for the 50th anniversary, the 150th anniversary of the Kansas National Guard. So the guy on the horse on the left-hand side there would be Colonel Martin there. And so they surprised him at the top. They kind of overrun the area there. They were on the crest of the hill so much that they couldn't aim their guns or their cannon steeply enough to hit them once they got going up the slope. And so, even so, there were 35 casualties, I think, that the 8th Kansas had, which didn't sound like a whole lot there, but they only had about a little bit more than 200 guys in the rank, because they were still suffering from being at Chickamauga, where they suffered 65% casualties. In fact, 2 of the companies were commanded by non-commissioned officers. Several of them, one was a sergeant and the other guy was a corporal there, and so that was the highest ranking, quote, officer that they had there. The 8th Kansas ends up going on veteran furlough in January of 1864. They come back to Nashville. Sherman has taken off, and they get the job of taking some pontoons, their whole wagon train of them, to Sherman, who's back at Chattanooga. Well, it's very slow going. The roads are terrible. They have to redo some of the roads. Some places they have to push or pull these pontoon wagons along with the rest of the with the other mules, I guess. But anyway, by the time they get to Chattanooga, they're not any closer to Sherman, because he's advancing, and he's advanced as much as they're not getting any closer to him. But they do need to repair the wagons. The roads were so rough. So they're there in around Chattanooga for about 20 days. And while they're there, they get to visit the Chattanooga battlefield. And they see a lot of their comrades, or what's left of them, that have not been buried, or that just had dirt thrown on them and then had washed away. So they sent a detachment out to bring in 25 remains that they could identify as their, some identified by what they were wearing or where they had killed. They sent a second group out with 14 more coffins and filled them as well. Conover was in charge of that group. And so they were reinterred at the National Cemetery in Chattanooga there. I kind of skipped over this part. These guys were kind of ragged and so forth before their veteran furlough came, and so a lot of them weren't sure they wanted to re-enlist, but with the veteran furlough, that was a big inducement. Some of them stopped to have their picture taken on this outcropping rock Lookout Mountain. And so this is a group of 8th Kansas. Martin is the guy kind of in the center. Conover is of the 3 guys standing in the back. I believe that's Conover in the there as well. And so, and some other members. They're not really identified, but I think I've positively identified those 2. I have some speculations on the other one. They joined Sherman in front of Atlanta. Earl Beardsley is the guy who's the commander of Company F at that time, and he had been severely wounded at Chickamauga, and he's wounded again in front of Atlanta, but by accident. He's oiling his pistol, and he ends up shooting himself kind of diagonally from like near the knee down to his ankle. And so he's sent back to the hospitals in Nashville to recover. Gangrene sets in, but still he survives that. But he's not able to walk much after that. So he does more duty behind the lines, and he's not with the 8th Kansas anymore. 8th Kansas will eventually be shipped to Texas, and that's where they do their final rolls, and he's not there, so he is listed as missing, you know, AWOL basically there. Although, so they did get that straightened out, and he had received an honorable discharge. He had been still with the Army working on court-martial things and things that didn't require a lot of fighting.
Do you have any idea how old he was in that picture?
In this picture,
looks young.
yeah.
He was 13.
Well,
Very young looking.
I don't have his age written down, but I think it was early 20s. And so, let's see, he's a lieutenant there. He worked his way up through the ranks, and so this would probably be some picture in 1864. So he may be 24-ish. But he looks a lot younger than that, doesn't he?
Sure,
yeah. A lot of these guys did. A lot of these guys did. And they were young. They were young. I mean, most of them were in their early 20s when the war started anyway. This is Claudius Kiefer. He's not from Company F, he's from Company B, but he was in command of the skirmish line in front of Atlanta, and when a call to advance happened. It ended up just being a feint that we're going to advance and then withdraw. But he didn't know that. So he takes his skirmishers, you know, within 8 yards of the enemy lines there, and of the 30 skirmishers or so there, 1 was killed, 5 were wounded, including him. He was wounded twice. And so he is kind of like Beardsley here. That ends his day with the 8th Kansas. He still is in the Army, but he does not rejoin them before the end of the war, so that's about a year. After the war, he becomes a freighter. Before the war, he came from the Kansas City area. He was a sheriff in that area. He ran a ferry boat there. He becomes a freighter after the war, and down in New Mexico, he has a disagreement with an innkeeper who clubs him over the head with something, and he's killed down in New Mexico about 5 or 6 years after the war. All right, so there in Atlanta, we begin to see kind of more and more the attrition that takes place here. Lieutenant Colonel James Graham resigns in September of 64. Martin in November of 64. They passed a rule, I guess you'd call a regulation, that said if you had served 3 years that you could resign, you could resign. And so they took advantage of that. There were reasons. Graham's wife back in Kansas had recently died, and that was kind of crushing. Colonel Martin had been commanding the brigade, so Graham had been commanding the regiment. But regiments were shrinking so much that they upped the number of regiments that were in the brigade. There was somebody more senior to him, so he's back commanding the regiment. And so I think that induced him. So Major Conover, who started as Captain Conover of Company F, becomes the commander of the regiment. Let's see. All right, so during Atlanta, Harrison Jones, is with a group of pickets. They cross the river. They surprise rebel pickets who are bathing in the river. They capture most of them, and those that escape do so without a stitch of clothing on. There. And so some of them made it back into rebel lines. That must have been an interesting story when they got back to explain where was their gun, and by the way, where were the pants. There. They continue on and they find five Confederates in a cabin. And so they surround it, and on the count, they burst open the doors and windows and surprise them. There's an officer, Confederate officer there, who orders his men to fire. At that point, these 8 Kansas guys fire and kill and wound all five of them. Harrison Jones, in the meantime, has advanced past the cabin, and he sees another Confederate there. And so he's pointing his rifle at him, and he says, you know, surrender. And the Confederate doesn't realize what's going on, and so he calls to him to surrender. No, you surrender, you surrender. And they go back and forth till finally Harrison Jones rushes the guy. The guy throws down his gun and up go his hands. And so this was all witnessed by his comrades there at the cabin, and so they gave him 3 cheers for the entertainment that he provided there with the others there. And so this, I should have shown that maybe here. That's kind of a drawing of what, you know, the pickets might have looked like there. So the last battle that the 8th Kansas is in is at the Battle of Nashville. They are defending Nashville. Confederate General Hood is attacking. They have them surrounded. They go out and attack, and that's Conover, I'm sorry, on the left-hand side there on his horse. His horse is killed in the fighting. Harrison Jones, that I just was talking about, he ends up being wounded and captured in the first assault there. And in the second assault, when the Confederates are overrun, Harrison Jones and one other guy pick up rifles and capture about 23 of the guys that were holding him prisoner. So it's kind of the Confederate Army is disintegrating here. About that time, that's their last battle. This is in December. April, Lee surrenders, and 8th Kansas is ordered to Texas. While they're on their way to Texas, Moses McCleary gets a furlough to go home and visit his family because his father is very ill. Before he reaches home, his father actually dies, just a few days before he got home. And so after the funeral and a little time, he reports to Leavenworth to be shipped down to Texas, which is where Company F and the rest of the 8th Kansas are. But at that point, they had said, anyone who's on furlough, you're discharged. You don't have to rejoin your unit. But because, you know, the war is over, and it won't be too long before the 8th Kansas is dismissed and heads home as well. But, so, how did he phrase it? He said, I was happy with that order. My mother needed me at home more than the government needed me in Texas. There. So, in Texas, Neff is in charge of the 23 guys that are left in Company S. They come back to Kansas, where they're greeted as heroes and fed at various areas around the way there. And so those are some of the things that happened to these guys here. After the war, Martin becomes the governor of Kansas. Conover on the right doesn't do politics much, but Martin is governor. He dies of pleural pneumonia, though, in 1889, and has the largest funeral in the history of Kansas up to that point. He was escorted by veterans of the 8th Kansas and was buried in his colonel's uniform. Conover has his own hardware business eventually, donates a lot of items to museums in Topeka, Leavenworth, and Kansas City area. After the war, they begin to put up monuments and so forth at Missionary Ridge, Orchard Knob, and Chickamauga. Harrison Jones, Mary comes home and marries, and eventually in 1900 will move to Oklahoma. Sergeant Jack, I said he died, but about 20 years after the war, his brother runs into Sergeant Jack's widow, and she finds out he was in the Army and died, so she applies for a pension. She's gathering evidence for more than a decade, according to the paperwork there. But a lot of red tape. The government said, well, when did he become ill from the illness that he died from? Was it before he deserted? Or after he was arrested or while he was awaiting sentence for trial? Or when he was in enemy hands? And they would only pay if it was for the first one, before he had deserted. So she couldn't prove that, so she never received her pension. Moses McCleary had some pension problems. He was only 14, but he said he was 18, so you don't look like the same person. I mean, the birthdays don't add up. Plus, since he had been discharged when he was away from his regiment, the regiment didn't know that, so he's listed as a deserter. But they finally did get that cleared up, and he did receive his pension there. In the end, in his twilight years, Moses McCleary, the young teenager, barely a teenager, wrote a short life history for his family. Most of it he wrote about his time with the 8th Kansas Infantry. And, quote, I'll read from that. He says, "That is the only history of my life worthy of remembrance." I'm not sure that's true, but it was something that really shaped him and shaped the soldiers and, that participated in it, and shaped our country as well. So the old veterans continued to be a political influence there throughout the rest of the war. Again, there's a GAR post in Holton that was named after one of the members of the 8th Kansas there. So that concludes my part 2 talk here. And again, that's a book that I wrote called "Keep the Flag to the Front," which was a phrase of the dying color bearer at the Battle of Chickamauga. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer those.
Those buildings that was behind the soldiers, they're still in there?
They're still there, and they're still in use. That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. I went up there and took those photos pre-9/11, and so when you could kind of just drive in there.
Yeah.
And so it was over Christmas break one year. I think you maybe saw some snow in the today pictures. So yeah, but they're still in use. Yeah.
My brother-in-law was stationed there before he retired. I should have went and had a tour of that place when she was there.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm sure Jim could still get us in there.
Yeah, I haven't tried recently, so I don't know. It's not as easy as it was, but I'm sure they want to know what the reason is. But, anyway, a lot more security now everywhere than what they're used to be. If you want a book, they're $10. It's kind of an Onaga show special there. If you like to read history, it's got a lot of history. If you don't like to read, it's got a lot of pictures. You can always just look, at the pictures.
It's yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be around here if you want to.